and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about emotions, and I can remember talking to you about what to do about very strong emotions because they have to be expressed. And I think what I'm trying to say is that all of our emotions need to be expressed, from the youngest, from the smallest, the least strong, to the heaviest, the strongest. They all have to be expressed, because if you don't express the emotions, they get turned inward into your body, resulting in health issues. So I just want to talk about the inward expression and outward expression of emotions. There is two terms you need to know: endogenous and exogenous. Endogenous is what's happening to you in the inside. Exogenous is what's happening to you on the outside through circumstances and things like that. So you have inward expression of emotions, which is endogenous, and outward expressions of emotions, which is exogenous. In either way, the emotions get expressed. It is better to express emotions outwardly than inwardly. We get all of that. We do both, actually, but if we do it outwardly, then it doesn't have a chance to turn inward and harm us emotionally and physically. So an exogenous expression of emotion is always best. Anger and grief turned inward cause depression. A lot of the people that you see that are really depressed, they're depressed not because something bad has happened to them, but because all of the anger that they have, all of the grief that they have, is all turned inward, and it's up to the body to take care of it. But what you get when you have that is you have a lot of health problems developing, sometimes ulcers, sometimes migraines. It doesn't matter, but you're going to have a physiological response to anything that's turned inward against yourself. And you know, it's important to teach children as they're growing up to express themselves in a safe way, of course. I don't mean in any kind of a violent way. You don't hit other people, you don't kick the dog, you don't slam the doors, but in a way that's creative, in a way that's useful, to get that out of your system. Because if you don't, you're going to hurt yourself in the long run. What happens in riots and other situations where there's a lot of physical danger is the fact that people feel helpless. If there's something that's happening to you and you feel helpless because of it, because you can't see any way to change it, because you can't see any way to do anything about it, that turns to helplessness, and then helplessness turns to rage. So you kind of get that cycle. You have something going on within or without, something that you feel that you can't change, something that you feel helpless to change. That helplessness turns to rage. From the circumstance, whether it's inward or outward, to the feeling of helplessness, and from that into the rage. There's a writer, his name was Rollo May, and he has written books that I really like, and he describes that process very well. He's an older psychologist. I haven't seen much in terms of his writing lately. I know he's passed on a long time ago, but the thing is, he had that concept, and he described it. Helplessness turns to rage. What would make you feel helpless? If you were being bullied, that would do it. If people were treating you unfairly, that would do it. If you had all of the worst jobs in a company and everybody else got the better jobs, and you knew that you were just as well qualified as anybody else, that would do it. Circumstances in your life: you lost a job, you were treated unfairly, you were bullied, you got some kind of a diagnosis, and then you really do have cancer like you thought you might, and anything that's really extreme, anything that bothers you, and you sit there kind of in shock. You go through kind of a grief reaction, and then you sit there in shock, and you don't know what to do about it. Now, in the case of bullying or being treated unfairly, this is most common in a way, but it's also the most difficult to handle. What do you do about a bully? Do you bully back? Do you tell them to cut it out? Well, I know what I did about it. As a teacher, if I knew a student was being bullied, I worked with the teacher of that student because I was in the counseling department. And a lot of times I would take the child out of the class just to talk with them, what's going on, and then the teacher would address the class about what they were doing to this poor student, and then they would stop for quite a while. Then if it returned, we did the same thing again. I would take the child out, I'd talk with this particular child. I have somebody in mind. It was a female student I had in mind that was being bullied by people in a class, and the teacher was a good teacher. He was really concerned about it, and he would come to me and say, well, this is what's going on. Let me take the child and talk to her. Then you talk to the class about their bullying her, and that it's going to stop, or there are going to be consequences. And we did it that way, and we stopped a lot of the bullying. Unfortunately, children feel ashamed of the fact that they're being bullied. It's like they feel like it's their fault. A child finds it always easy to blame themselves when something goes wrong, and you have to watch for that because it's going to happen over and over again. It's the child's way of coping. They think, well, it must be my fault or it wouldn't be happening to me. And they feel depressed and they're anxious. But you know, some of these people who turn on other students and they end up by having shootouts, and who does the shooting? It's somebody who is quiet, but somebody who is being bullied. It happens over and over and over again. Because psychologically what's happening is this student is getting bullied and doesn't feel he could do anything about it or she can do anything about it. And as a result of that, they get angrier and angrier and angrier, but they also get depressed. And then they want to take judgment. They want to take judgment because they know they're being treated unfairly, but they haven't gone to a counselor to talk about it. They haven't gone to their parents to talk about it because they feel ashamed and feel that maybe it's something that they've done wrong. Nonetheless, you see, the emotions become very conflicted. I'm being bullied. It's my fault. I must have done something wrong. At the same time, I'm angry about it because I don't want it to continue and I can't stop it. So what's the feeling tone is I'm helpless. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in a place where I can't do anything. I'm either going to lash out and get my revenge, or I'm just going to put up with it, and things are going to get worse and worse, and I'm going to be more and more depressed. Now, a child doesn't necessarily understand all of the psychodynamics that's going on, but as an adult, we can figure that out for them. You are angry because you're being bullied, and I don't blame you. I'd be angry too. So let's stop the bullying before it goes any further. Then you'll be treated right, and you won't need to feel badly. And then you also have to deal with the false guilt. Someone's being bullied, they feel guilty. In divorce cases, children always feel guilty. They feel if they were a better kid, they would have parents that would get along. They must be doing something wrong because their parents don't get along, and it goes on and on and on. But you can see the cycle of what's happening here. They get hurt, the child gets hurt, and it happens to adults too. I don't want to leave the adults out. Adults get bullied as well. And then they start feeling helpless because they don't think they can do anything about it. Because if they report it to the teacher, or if they report it to whoever they're dealing with, then the bullying might get worse because, after all, they'll be punished for telling on this person. And then they start feeling helpless, and this helplessness will always turn to rage. And then you get the person who you least expect to lashing out in a very destructive way. And if you look at the psychodynamics, especially in the high school shootings, they'll say, well, this person was very quiet. No one paid much attention to them. Or this person was always bullied. No one paid much attention to them except to bully them. And so now they got a gun and they shot up everybody. So I think you have to look at the psychodynamics behind what's going on. What happens to you physically if you don't express those emotions and they get turned inward is that you are going to suffer. You're going to get depressed. You're going to get angry. It's going to turn to rage, or it may stop at the point where you're physiologically distressed by it. Migraines, different types of headaches, ulcers, some kinds of other physical problems that you might have, including depression. It always happens as a result. There's going to be a physiological reaction to what you're suffering from unless you can express it. And it's best to express it outwardly in a creative way. If you can't do it in a creative way, then it's going to be done in a destructive way, and it's going to be done abruptly, and it's going to be done so rapidly. And the person isn't going to feel like they're in any kind of control. It happens in marriages. You know, in marriages that fail, the same thing happens. Somebody is bullied or they're harassed by their spouse, either male or female, and then what happens after that? They feel like they can't do anything about it. They feel frustrated. They feel like they can't help, and they feel helpless about it, and then the divorce gets started. Or I can't stand him anymore. He used to be a nice guy when we first get married. Now things change, and he's not who we thought he was. Now, what happens in marriages a lot is when you marry a person, you really don't know who they are. You think you know who they are. You may be marrying an image of the person and not the true person. That's something that you have to figure out. When you know somebody long enough and you get married to them, you should know them to know what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, what they need from you, what they want from you, and they should know the same about you. So you don't go into a marriage being blindsided. You know, I dread it when people come on television and say, well, I just got married, isn't he wonderful? Well, how long did you know him? 2 weeks. And that happens. And then after 2 weeks, the person starts changing. And what they had presented in a dating relationship was they had presented their best foot forward. They had presented themselves as the person that they want the other person to see. But then that facade doesn't last forever. It eventually wears off. And when that happens, then you see the true person who isn't the person that you thought he or she was. And I think what happens in Hollywood marriages, you know how short they are. Or we'll get married, it'll last forever. And then what happens is something happens in the marriage and it just falls apart. They had this fabulous wedding that they spent thousands and thousands of dollars on, beautiful gown, beautiful ceremony. A month or two later, they're calling it off because they can't get along. Why? Because they married an image. They married the image of who they thought the person was, and then it turned out that person was not their image, but there was a lot more to them. So I'm a great believer in marriage counseling, because pre-marriage counseling, because you need to know what your spouse is about before you ever tie the knot, and they need to know what you are all about. Some people get married for the entirely wrong reason. They get married because they need to be taken care of, or a person can meet their needs. And then what happens? Well, what happens is it doesn't work out because the person doesn't want to meet their needs for the rest of their lives. You know, we need to marry for love. We need to marry for love and love only, but all of the other problems that can arise need to be seen in advance and worked out. You need to define your relationship, so you're not marrying just an image, you're marrying an actual person. You know, I'm amazed at how many doctors will fall in love with one of their patients, or a patient will fall in love with their doctor. It's called a transference relationship. But sometimes they'll get married in that transference relationship. And as long as they maintain their roles of I'm taking care of you, you're my patient, I'm your patient, you're taking care of me, sometimes it can work out for quite a while. But then something happens. The person may not want to be taken care of for the rest of their lives. They want to be independent. The caregiver doesn't want to be a caregiver for the rest of their lives. They want to be independent. Their roles change, their needs change, their wants change. And as a result of that, you have a marriage marriage that was based on a facade that doesn't work anymore. So all of these things need to be worked out before you actually tie the knot. And you need to know for sure that you're not marrying an image, but you're marrying the person as they really are. And sometimes it's hard to tell that. You don't want to have extremely long engagements, because then it becomes more like a brother-sister relationship. But neither do you want to get married hardly knowing the person at all, because it may not work out, because you're not marrying who you think you are. And I just heard it so much. I'm frankly glad that I'm single. I don't have to worry about it because I've never been married. But I see it happen to people all the time, and I work with it all the time. And so it's just something that you have to be aware of. Well, let's go on from this. People who feel helpless and it turns to rage, or it turns inward to depression, you get headaches, tiredness, anxiety, ulcers, and so forth. And I want to mention something about ulcers. Ulcers also are caused by bacteria. People used to think that, it's not what you eat, but it's what's eating you. In other words, there was an emotional component to ulcers. And if you had an ulcer, it meant that something was wrong psychologically and it was affecting your digestion. Now, everybody knows that bacteria and other illnesses cause ulcers. It's not just emotions that are doing it. But I can remember professors saying to me, it's not what you eat that's doing it. It's what's eating you that's doing it. In other words, whatever emotional thing you're going through at the time that isn't helpful to you, that you're not handling well, can turn into an ulcer. And I still imagine that sometimes that does occur, but there are also other reasons for having ulcers. But anxiety, tiredness, headache, what happens in a marriage, if the marriage goes sour, all of the creativity of the marriage, where each person supports themselves and each other as they're growing, stops. All of the creativity stops, and what happens is that the energy goes into maintaining the relationship as best as it can be maintained. So if a person, say a female, is married to a male, and they're doing well with each other, and she has projects she wants to do, and she has courses she wants to take, and she wants to learn how to have certain skills and get a certain kind of job, he wants the same, and they support each other, and it works out well. They can have a lot of freedom in a marriage if they're supporting each other, because then they can support each other and give each other the freedom to grow. And that's the kind of marriage that I like to see. But should something go wrong in the marriage, then what happens is that growth and that creativity stop. It takes a lot of creativity and it takes a lot of energy to keep a marriage going. But if that creativity stops because there's a problem, then whatever energy they have goes into maintaining that relationship, hopefully so that the relationship can subside. But there's no more growth, there's no more creativity. Everything gets poured right back into the relationship. And at that point, the marriage really is in trouble and no one's making any progress. So it gets to be really, really dicey what you know and what you don't know about marriages. It can really affect you. And in terms of the emotions involved with this, the emotions, they have to be expressed in a positive way so that you don't really get yourself in trouble. A lot of healthy ways to get emotions expressed would be through sports and arts and writing and even cleaning. Some women just scrub the floor, get on their hands and knees and scrub the floor, but they're getting all their anxieties out of their system. But you can also express yourself outwardly in a bad kind of way. You can start attacking people. You can do things that are dangerous to yourself and to other people. So it needs to be, if you're going to create and get your anxiety out of your system, and you're going to do it in a creative way, which would be outward aggression, which is good. I hate to use that word aggression, but that's what it's called. Then you can do it in an artistic and healthy way through sports, through different kinds of activity, and you work it out that way. Instead of having it pinned into you internally and making you ill in another kind of way. We're going to, next time, about our out of time, we'll be talking about frustration, frustration tolerance, having nervous breakdowns. And by the way, there is no such thing as a nervous breakdown, but I'll get into that next time. So I'm going to close it here because we are pretty much out of time. And we'll deal with frustration and issues dealing with frustration and how to handle that next time. So please join me then.